Roman family and clothing. Marriage was officially between a man and a woman in the Roman world. Many marriages were not romantic but arranged between families seeking to maintain or to improve the family wealth and social status. The main purpose of marriage was to produce legitimate children and have a family. Fathers had full powers over their children. This was called patria potestas. They could disown their children and even sell them as slaves. Women would marry quite early between the ages of 12 and 20, while men would marry at around 25. If the woman belonged to a rich family, she would usually marry very early, and she would not choose her husband, as marriages were arranged between rich families. Before getting married, couples would get engaged in a ceremony where the groom would give his future wife an iron ring. On the evening before the marriage, the bride would sacrifice her childhood toys at the lares, which were family spirits. The marriage ceremony started with a procession led by the groom and going to the bride's home. The bride would be at her house wearing a simple white tunico recta, a belt with a special knot called anodus Hercules, which the groom would later have to undo, orange shoes, and an orange wedding veil. The ceremony would start with an animal sacrifice to obtain the favor of the gods. Then there would be an exchange of gifts, a dowry agreed upon, and a written marriage contract signed. The dowry given by the bride's family would often include jewelry, land, real estate, or slaves. The marriage was usually paid by the bride's family. The couple would then exchange vows, and a large banquet would follow at the house. After the banquet, a procession would lead the bride to her new home. The bride would be carrying a torch with the earth of her old home. Once in front of her new home, she would be offered another torch and water. Attendants would carry her over to the threshold of her new home so she wouldn't trip, which was considered a bad omen or bad luck. The groom would then ask her for her forename. Since Roman women did not have forenames, she would respond, "Where you are Gaius, there shall I be Gea." There would be another short religious ceremony in the new house. The next day, there would be an offering to the lares and another smaller banquet for close relatives. The tunica was a rectangle pinned around the shoulders and sewn at the edges to form a tabular shape. It was the basic garment of men and women worn under a toga. The toga was a cloth made of thick wool and wrapped around the body. It was usually 6 meters long. Romans also wore sandals called sandalia and shoes called colsiae. Men usually wore a tunic or a toga, while women wore a stola, which was like a dress worn over a tunic. Women also wore the pola over the stola, which was like a shawl that sometimes had a hood. They also had various decorative elements on the stola. Men often wore sandals, while women wore closed shoes. Women's clothes and shoes would usually have bright colors. Roman clothing also distinguished the different social classes. For example, Pelvis wore a tunic They were often dark and made of an inexpensive material or thin wool felt. Patrici wore white tunics made of expensive linen, fine wool, or rare silk. Shoes also indicated social status. Patrici wore expensive red sandals with an ornament at the back or red shoes called the cassimoulier. Plebeians wore discarded leather sandals. There were also specific clothing for senators and magistrates. Senators would wear tunics with purple stripes called tunica laticlavi. Purple was an expensive color. Magistrates wore another kind of tunic called the tunica angustilavi. Generals would wear the toga palmate, which had a gold border to celebrate a triumphus. Emperors wore the torbea, which was an entirely purple toga.